And thank you so much, Joe and Steve, for hosting me at Quarry Farm, and my friend and publicist and supporter, Laura McCandlish, who really is responsible for the hors d'oeuvres and the champagne, so I really can't take any credit for that. It's been a pleasure to drive here from Brunswick, Maine, to discover Elmira College. We went to Barb's Soup Kitchen today, had a fantastic time, met a lot of different people from the college, and we also went to the Corning Museum. So I feel like we've done Elmira, and yet I feel like coming back. The house has been, as Joe mentioned, I've just started this new podcast on literary houses in Maine. Brunswick is home to one of Harriet Beecher Stowe's houses, the house where she wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. And I spent about a decade trying to save that house because the college wanted to tear it down and turn it into a parking lot. So I devoted much time trying to restore the house, and it now is restored, and that's how I got into literary houses. Our first season is 7 episodes, and they're all based on literary houses in Maine, but we are hoping, me and my co-host Brock Clark, that the show gets picked up by one of these production companies, and maybe we'll come to New York State, and that'll be our next date. We'll be able to do Mark Twain, or who knows what's in our future. So that's a little bit about me and my time here, and my great thanks for being here. So as Joe mentioned, I've just written this biography, and I stumbled across news about Mark Twain's 70th birthday while investigating the life of Charles Chesnutt. I've now completed the biography, which will be released by St. Martin's Press in February. It's in the book's penultimate chapter called Literary Celebrity that I discuss Twain's birthday party, which he attended on December 5th, 1905. Is this the clicker? Yep. So I'd like to begin by giving you a sneak peek into the book and to give you a sense of the party's significance. So now I'm just going to read an excerpt from the book, and then we're just going to talk. I'm just going to talk a little bit more free-flowing because I stumbled across this birthday party, which I didn't know about. It was a really big deal, and now I'm figuring out what its significance was beyond just Charles Chesnutt. So exalted by the critical success of his last novel that he published, though he didn't know it was going to be his last novel, called The Colonel's Dream, but not yet aware of its disappointing sales, Charles Chesnutt was delighted when his invitation to Mark Twain's 70th birthday party arrived in the mail. The party was to be held at Delmonico's, the most fashionable restaurant in New York City, located on the corner of 26th Street and 5th Avenue on Tuesday, December 8th at 8:00 p.m. It was hosted by Colonel George Harvey, a successful businessman, editor of the North American Review, and president of the publishing firm Harper & Brothers. The party became known as the literary event of the new century. Harvey invited more than 170 guests, 161 attended. Among those who sent their regrets were President Theodore Roosevelt and novelist Edith Wharton, who was in Europe at the time after the success of her novel, The House of Mirth. So she did not give a toast, but Theodore Roosevelt did, and it was read, this toast, by the president of Vassar's Alumni College. Those who attended were mostly well-known writers and humorists. Harvey acted as host and MC. He had a 40-piece orchestra perform, provided everyone with elaborate party favors, including a foot-tall, this is what this is, a foot-tall plaster of Paris bust of Twain. And I've never seen one of these, but I was told by Catherine, that the librarian, that's her name, right, Catherine? That the bust is at the Hartford House. And while I was doing my my literary house tour, William Dean Howells's summer home is in Kittery Point, and that house is now owned by Harvard. And we weren't allowed to go into the house, but we did peek in the windows, and the bust is there in his study, but we couldn't look at it. Anyway, There was this plaster bust there. Everybody got their picture taken. This was a sonnet to Mark Twain by William Dean Howells. It's kind of a beautiful sonnet. And there was also, here's the menu. There was this special printed menu with sketches by the popular cartoonist Leon Barrett showing various episodes of Twain's spectacular rise to literary fame and fortune. You can see all the items, and so that's why we have the champagne, mushroom toast, and cucumbers, which were items on the menu, along with green turtle, oysters, parlayed potatoes, saddle of lamb, Colbert, stuffed tomatoes, Baltimore terrapin. So this is, and red head duck. These are all sort of items from the Gilded Age. The party was a grand celebration of Twain's life and work, but it was also meant to be a celebration of American literature and its writers. The New York Times described the event on its front page the following day. Never before in the annals of this country had such a representative gathering of literary men and women been seen under one roof. They were representative in every conceivable respect, even geographically. There was no corner of this country that did not have at least one favorite son or daughter present. The far north and the extreme south, the New England states and the Pacific slope all sent delegates. This was a gathering not just to celebrate Mark Twain, it was a symbol of the spirit of American democracy, manifested by its most beloved literary men and women. Chestnut fit right in. Chestnut had taken the train from Cleveland to New York City almost immediately after enjoying Thanksgiving dinner. Now, you might know that Mark Twain's actual birthday is on November 30th, not December 5th, but it was a few days later. Everything was closed. And Susan, his wife, had been preparing a meal and getting Chestnut ready for his trip. She had packed a new dress suit that she had custom made by Cleveland's most sought-after tailor. And you can see that he kind of fits in with the other famous literary figures. And every table had their picture taken. And then these photographs would be in a special supplement of Harper's Weekly. Other than the presence of Dr. Charles Eastman, a member of the Dakota Sioux tribe and well-known author of Indian Boyhood, Chestnut was the only, quote, colored writer in attendance. Susan, his wife, wanted her family and friends to see him as part of the inner circle, so she made sure he looked the part of an author of America's Gilded Age. Perhaps Susan would have liked to accompany her husband on this occasion, but she wouldn't have known what to wear among all those stylish literary types. Anyway, her name had not been included on the invitation. She would have to wait and hear all the juicy details when Chestnut returned home a week later. The dinner was a formal white tie affair. All the men, as you can see in this photograph, wore black tailcoat and a white bow tie tucked under a stiff collar. The women wore floor-length ball gowns of varying colors and styles. Chestnut, as you can see, was seated between the journalist and proto-conservationist Ernest Ingersoll and Anna Parmalee Parrott, an author of advice columns and manners for Harper's. Across from him sat Carolyn King Dewar, the stylish editor of Vogue magazine, then as now, setting trends in the world of American fashion. She had written to Chestnut a few years earlier, requesting a portrait of Chestnut for Vogue's literary department. Dewar had regarded Chestnut to be a leading author of the day and was delighted to meet him in person. She was also a writer of short stories and essays known for her sense of humor and wit. Although there is no transcript of their dinner conversation, it was undoubtedly full of laughter and high-spirited storytelling. Chestnut also mingled with other guests at the dinner. There was his old friend George Washington Cable, who alongside Richard Watson Gilder and William Dean Howells delivered one of the evening's more memorable toasts to Twain. But he would have also been introduced to new, decidedly modern American writers like, I don't know if you recognize the woman in the picture, the very front, that's Willa Cather, this was before she became a famous novelist, and Emily Post. And these writers were just beginning to make names for themselves in the ever-changing world of American literature at the dawn of the 20th century. Though held a few days after his actual birthday on November 30th, Twain's birthday party at Delmonico's on December 5th, 1905, signaled a major shift in American literature. No longer the bastion of the New England, Harvard-educated elites, its center was now located in New York City, with Mark Twain, born Samuel Clemens, on the bank of the Mississippi in Midwestern Missouri at its helm. So, Chestnut was just a few years from his 50th when he helped Twain celebrate his 70th. Despite the differences in their age and stature, Chestnut seemed poised to join the king of American literature, as Howells dubbed Twain that night, as a member of this singular American aristocracy of brains. So that's just an excerpt that I wanted to read to you from the book, but what I really want to talk about with you, and hope you have questions and suggestions and comments, is to discuss the significance of this dinner party, this birthday party that happened in 1905. Because my hunch is that though most of us don't know about the birthday party, it was the event of the century. And the fact that we don't know about it, I don't know what to do with that information, only that it kind of changes, at least for me, my understanding of what American literature is. And that is that American literature had the potential, at least at that time, to be kind of like the Oscars. This was like the red carpet where people were showing off their fashions, and it was really in and hip to be a literary person. So that kind of style and fashion statement of being an author has certainly gone out of fashion. Now, when people, other critics, and I've been staying in the Quarry farmhouse, so I am totally overwhelmed by how much criticism has been written on Mark Twain. I am not really going to contribute to that vast literature, nor am I going to read it all or cite it all. But this event has only been mentioned by a few, I do know this, a few of the Twain critics. And one of the reasons it isn't talked about all that much is because even though it was about Twain, and Twain was the center, it's not really about his books. It was about this gathering of literary people, humorists, writers, journalists, just getting together. And my hunch is that because they all came because Twain was at the center of it, maybe that was one of the reasons why people didn't want to talk so much about it. What's interesting is that all these people were at this event and got to know each other. William Dean Howells gave the first toast of the evening. So Harper's Weekly created this supplement, and there's a full transcription of everybody's toasts. The dinner party lasted for 5 hours because so many of these toasts were so long. Twain's speech itself lasted for like 35 minutes because he himself stood up and gave a speech. And then Richard Watson Gilder gave a speech. Kate Wiggin gave a speech. This was the first literary event in which you have men and women who aren't necessarily married or that are mingling with each other. So it was also that kind of event. It was a social event in which people could meet each other. So for all of these reasons, I want to suggest that it had the potential to kind of change American literature from being this mostly white, male bastion of writing to something kind of different, where women were writing, where people of color were writing, and this shifted our understanding of American literature. So I don't know if you guys have any questions or thoughts about this dinner party, if you've heard of it before, if there's anything about the dinner party that you want to ask about. I have read the entire record that Harper's published. The speeches are pretty long, and some of them are funny, and because it's all transcribed, they have in brackets laughter, more laughter, intense laughter, and people are waving their napkins to, show their appreciation for these different speeches. But the speeches, even though, like as you saw, the one example I provided here was the sonnet to Mark Twain. that, I don't know, can you guys see that? Do you want me to read it? Read it? Sonnet to Mark Twain. A traveler from the old world just escaped our customs with his life, had found his way to a place uptown where a colossus shaped itself, skyscraper high against the day, a vast smile dawning from its mighty lips. Like sunshine on its visage seemed to brood, one eye winked in perpetual eclipse. In the other, a huge tear of pity stood. Wisdom in chunks about its temples shone, its measureless bulk grotesque. Exultant rose, and while titanic puissance clothed it on, patience with foreigners was in its pose. So that, what art thou? The emboldened traveler spoke, and it replied, I am the American joke. I am the joke that laughs the proud to scorn. I mock at cruelty. I banish care. I cheer the lowly, chipper the forlorn. I bid the oppressor and hypocrite beware. I tell the tale that makes men cry for joy. I bring the laugh that has no hate in it. In my heart of age, I wake the undying boy. My big stick blossoms with a thornless wit. The lame dance with delight in me. My mirth reaches the deaf untrumpeted. The blind my point can see. I jolly the whole earth, but most I love to jolly my own kind. Joke of a people great, gay, bold, and free. I type their master mood. Mark Twain made me. I mean, it's an interesting sonnet, partly because Mark Twain is now setting off, or he's responsible for, the writers that come after him. And people are writing like Mark Twain, but he's also determining what is going to be the future of American literature. And what that future is kind of breaking from this past of a Hawthorne, Melville, Washington Irving, kind of the origins of American literature, to something that's funny, to something that's a joke, to something that's willing to poke fun at itself. And this, I think, suggests that we need to come up with a new definition for what constitutes American literature if we make Mark Twain, as Ernest Hemingway has said, the origin of all American literature. It's quite late, 1905. It's not 1776 or 1850, 1852, when Hawthorne and Harriet Beecher Stowe are publishing. This is a new kind of American literature that's entertainment, funny, and for the masses. And this kind of literature needs, I think, to be put at the center of what we understand American literature to be. So that's basically the kind of thesis or argument, insofar as there is one here, of the importance of this Delmonico's 70th birthday party event. Has anyone ever been to Delmonico's? The steak? It's still there.
And more.
What's that?
Throw parties like that every weekend? I'll go.
Never been to Delmonico's? My sister-in-law has been there, and she said now, like, they've preserved a lot of the history. There's still this red room where Mark Twain had his birthday party, but now mostly it's bankers who are enjoying their whiskey and rare filet mignon, you know. That's mostly what goes on at Delmonico's today. But it was at one time a kind of center for American literature. And it seems like some of that humor and fun of American literature has been kind of lost. And I think that if we retrace our steps, go back to this moment, to actually suggest that American literature began on December 8th, 1905 at Delmonico's, we get to tell a very different story about what American literature was and still can be. So that's basically what I wanted to share with you, and I'd be really curious if you have any thoughts. Please, go ahead.
Just walked in 5 minutes and I just went,
Yeah. So you haven't had any of the champagne or cucumbers?
No, I missed that part, yeah. It's just making me think of Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point, where he talks about people sort of being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And then sprinkling some magic. And I always think, when I think about Mark Twain, Sam Clemens as a person, and it hits you the moment you walk into the property here or Hartford, and which is, he was a connector. It was just part of, he really enjoyed connecting people.
Yeah.
Sometimes people who were very similar.
Yeah.
Sometimes people who were not.
Yeah.
But it was like one of the unique parts of him as a person, not
Yeah.
just as a writer,
Yeah.
was to like these people together. And it feels like this is like an event where they sort of hit critical mass.
Yeah.
Before that, the Melvilles and all the people you mentioned were so far apart from each other, the likelihood that they could even be in the room together in their lifetime was pretty low before one or the other would pass away.
Yeah.
And now you finally have enough people sort of invested in, an American form of art.
Yeah, and I guess what's so interesting when you say he's a connector, because Howells was the influencer, and they're best buds, right? Howells is the tastemaker. He's deciding who's in and who's out, who's making good art or bad art. But Mark Twain's not interested in that kind of criticism. He's interested in bringing everybody in. Now, he was not the one who made the guest list. It was Colonel Harvey who made the guest list. And basically, Colonel Harvey just wanted to invite everybody he thought was like the A-list. And what's amazing is that Chestnut was on this A-list. And the fact that he had a sense that it's not so much about like what is, I think Chestnut was writing good literature, but that's my opinion. But Howells was not, at that time, a huge fan of Chestnut's. But what Mark Twain was doing, he just wanted people. And he didn't have any kind of like objective. He wasn't trying to sort of make it who's in and who's out. He wanted everybody in. And I think there is something about this event that was incredibly inclusive that is also part of what distinguishes American literature from actually other national literatures. And I don't think that's something that we think about in terms of American literature. What was your name?
Oh, Michael.
Michael, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Any other thoughts? Yes?
Just to work it out myself.
Yeah.
Well, at this time, Twain was probably quite more on the ill side. So did that say, wait a minute, he's kind of failing. Let's get this meeting together. And the other thought was,
Yeah.
at this time, with better printing, more industrial things, women stepping out. I mean, they lived through the Civil War and had to be nurses, and were braver to write, and so they themselves maybe made American literature grow by, just as you said, letting in the fringes.
Mm-hmm. So do you think like Mark Twain wasn't really playing much of a role in that because you called him failing?
Oh, his health was very bad by this time.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if it was a concern that he might not make it.
I mean, it's funny because that was a joke of the whole night. Like it's kind of a funny thing to think about death. He dies 5 years later in 1910 at the age of 74, right before his 75th birthday. And Howells ends his toast as he says, here's the king of American literature. I won't say long live the king, but live as long as you'd like. And all of these things about how much longer he has. He thinks he's got, forever. There's no sense of him ailing, I guess, is the sense of the party. And in terms of the women, yeah, I agree with you. I think women are, it's a new era for women. You said something about the industrial press?
Well, more newspapers, more books, easier, cheaper to print, the traveling salesman, pushing it out into the countryside, making a bigger group of people reading and buying books.
Yeah.
And interested in it.
I mean, I also study Harriet Beecher Stowe, and one thing about this earlier generation of women writers is that though they were writing a lot, they didn't go out much, or they didn't like to speak publicly so much. There were a few, like Anna E. Dickinson was one of these, The Bostonians by Henry James. She's a character in his novel. But the women didn't like to make a spectacle of themselves. They wrote in their rooms, and though they wrote for money, they didn't go out much. What's so interesting about this event is that women are kind of making spectacles of themselves. They're really dressed up. I mean, I don't know about you, but usually the picture I see of Willa Cather is the one where she's wearing a much more subdued outfit. She's got a tie. She looks much more like, yeah, exactly. And here they are in their ball gowns and sort of showing themselves off. So there's also something about the personality of the women writer at this time too. They're willing to be seen in a way.
And little suffrage is getting much closer to success. And
Yeah.
those women talked and traveled.
Yeah.
They were probably...
Yep, giving speeches. Yep, political speeches mostly. And these are women who are really more interested in their literary careers. And they're not there with husbands. And so besides the literary people, there's also people like Andrew Carnegie and his wife. They're at this party. Because as you were saying before, Michael, Twain knew everybody. He's so well connected and he's rich. And these factors about who Mark Twain is also a different kind of, it's not like Hawthorne, who is this kind of ghostly figure, or Melville, who wrote in his attic. You know, Mark Twain is such a public figure, but he's also pulling everybody with him into the public eye and making them kind of known and seen in a way that you don't usually see American writers out there, especially with women by their side. Any other thoughts about this party that you can help me understand why it might be important? Or maybe you don't think it's important. I don't know. I mean, besides the champagne. Yeah.
It seems to me there was in his autobiography that he wrote something about that, or maybe it was Anne and when we were taking that course here. We've heard about this.
Yeah, what have you heard? Yeah.
Well, I didn't do my homework before I came, but somewhere I've read something about it, and it might have been in one of the 3 volumes of his.
Okay, I'll
his
check that.
Autobiography.
Yeah.
And because they talked about that. And it might even be it's heavily annotated in the back, so there might even be his speech in there or something.
Yeah.
It's in the second floor.
It's in the second one?
No, it's up on the second floor.
Oh, the speech he gave was on
Oh.
Well, all of his
I don't think
speeches.
that's where I read it.
Yeah. You didn't read it in Quarry Farm?
No, not. Well, I might have, and I just completely forgot, which is.
Did you have any thoughts about it when you read about it the first time or heard about it? Whatever?
Well, it always, I remember so we took some classes here over the last 10 years or so, and every summer, and we kind of learned more and more about him as we went.
Mm-hmm.
And there was always things about death that he seemed to talk about that struck me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he had the Stormfield's visit to heaven or something like that. He always had something about death and dying. And when he got older, I seem to recall him writing about that. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that interested him, or he was always worried about it, or he just found it a humorous thing to write about.
But, yeah. So.
At the party or any time.
Yeah, but Barb is Barb, right? Did I get? Yeah. As you were saying, he is he knows he's going to die pretty soon.
He has a smoker's cough.
Right. And he's 70 years old, and he makes a big deal about being 70 years old. So it is like he's now anticipating what American literature is going to be after he's gone. And it's almost like he's setting out with the help of his friends, his good friends, like William Dean Howells, the writer and critic, Richard Watson Gilder, he's an editor of the Century magazine, also another tastemaker, and he's a critic. And he's setting out almost like a blueprint of what American literature is going to be. And to me, there's something kind of, like crafty about it, that he has a sense, though we don't give, Mark Twain is this larger than life figure, obviously, but how he thinks about American literature as a distinct entity is not something I think that we think all that much about. Like, nobody puts Mark Twain and Willa Cather together, but here she was at the party, or Emily Post or Charles Chestnut. Not that they were, enemies, but they weren't best friends. And it's him connecting them, as Michael was saying, that's sort of the interesting thing about Mark Twain. So we don't talk about a lot of movements in American literature. William Dean Howells is kind of the dean of American literature. He's the founder of American literary realism. There's a Harlem Renaissance that happens later in the 20th century, in the 1920s. But what would the movement that Mark Twain is the head of, what would that movement in American literature be called? Because the one thing that Mark Twain is obviously really known for is the joke. It's his sense of humor. And we still have the Mark Twain Award that's awarded every year to a stand-up comedian. I think, did Adam Sandler just win it or somebody like that? Yeah, was it Adam Sandler? So we kind of recognize him, his comedy, his sense of humor, but there's also something about how he shaped American literature that's also significant, but we don't quite attribute it so much to Mark Twain, perhaps.
So he was a crafter of the word.
Yeah.
So I think you're totally right that he was steering the boat.
Yeah. And also making literature not just high American literature, but also popular American literature. That was the idea that he was going for. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I just, very quickly.
Yes, please.
It's been a while. I had a job on campus to help proofread some of Twain's manuscripts. And one of the reasons we were being and he had been such a stickler, was because there was a deep competition with the Brits and publishing the whole, producing text, being able to spread these cheaper books and all of that.
Yeah.
And I think there was a bit of rivalry in terms of the European salon and their whole thing, like, we've got culture. We've got culture, and they wanted to say, well, we got culture too, baby.
Yeah, yeah,
I think,
yeah.
you don't, because all of these people, we may think of so-and-so as a country writer or whatever, but
Yeah.
these people are very urbane. They're coming from big American cities that are maybe not even being seen as cities yet, perhaps like Cleveland,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, that's where Chestnut's coming from.
And so you end up with, hey, we've got civilization too.
Yeah,
We just have a little bit of a different style, and you know what, maybe we have a little more flair.
yeah,
And maybe that's one of the reasons the ladies decided, you know what, I am gonna dress up for this one.
yeah, yeah. And also like the kind of style, I mean, this is like the Gilded Age too, right? But I think you're right. It is in contrast to the British European style. And what the difference is, you call that flair.
It's also broad, it's that breadth that you're talking about,
Yeah.
which is, hey, we're including people from, and you guys don't even know where that is.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
places.
It's
Big ideas too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the phrase that William Dean Howells uses in his toast to Twain, to riff on, tell me your name? Wanda, to riff on Wanda's term flair, he uses this phrase, this is a gathering of the aristocracy of brains. So it's not an aristocracy of, I don't know, blood and breeding and titles, knights and kings or whatnot. So he is totally riffing on that. But this aristocracy is a literary aristocracy that you write yourself into, you're not born into. And that difference is obviously very important to Twain.
And the fact that our education system had already been widening, and women were going to school, and people of color.
Right, right. So that kind of literature, which is for anyone, I mean, that's Mark Twain's life anyway, right? He's born on the banks of the Mississippi in poverty, and he kind of works himself up. But he does this through literature, I suppose he also does it through speculation and investments, right? Like that's how he makes his $7 million. And he marries well, which is also, I guess, pretty important. But it does seem like that's kind of the style of the party, that through literature, you can enter into the aristocracy, which is an American aristocracy that requires some kind of literary chops or something. Do you buy it? Like, is this a way of understanding American literature in opposition to British literature?
Well, I mean, only 20-some years later, folks are off to Spain. A lot of writers went.
Yeah,
What did they think it was something? A lot of American writers went.
to Spain,
The
Yeah.
Civil War.
to the Civil War.
Yeah, so I mean, you've got a grouping of people who obviously identify with each other and feel that they have a caste or a weight in society or a moral standing, no matter what their original class, economic class, or whatever.
Well, maybe that, yeah, and maybe that matters less than I like your term that you just used, literary caste, because it is a new way of thinking about your identity based on your reading and writing.
Wasn't he pretty instrumental, speaking of literary canon, of making sure that the United States had a copyright law?
That's right.
So you could say that he might be father to the literary canon because he helped preserve it.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
as a publisher, I mean, it was always who would beat him to the punchline, his own publishing company or the one over there in London, you know?
Michael?
What did he say in his, I'm going to imagine there was a lot of gratitude in his own speech at this event. Did he say anything that stood out? The speech was preserved?
Yeah, the speech is totally preserved. You can find the Harper's Weekly. I found it in my special collections library. But the thing that stood out for me, and I didn't quote it here, but
Just thinking about your comments about him wanting to kind of set up the game for the future, you know, get all the pieces, get all the people in one room.
he talked for a really long time, and a lot of it was just telling jokes.
Well, probably by the
Did he
time
roast Carnegie a little bit?
No, he was roasting himself. He was totally like talking about how, oh, this 70th birthday reminds me of my first birthday. And he was talking about being born and the first birthday speech he gave, you know, and he tells like a bunch of jokes about his first birthday speech where he's crying and he's, you know, just shitting his diaper, and it's very funny. And then he says, the 70th birthday, exclamation mark, it is the time of life when you arrive at a new and awful dignity, when you may throw aside the decent reserves which have oppressed you for a generation and stand unafraid and unabashed upon your 7-terraced summit and look down and teach unrebuked. You can tell the world how you got there. It is what they all do. You shall never get tired of telling by what delicate arts and deep moralities you climbed up to that great place. You will explain the process and dwell on the particulars with senile rapture. I have been anxious to explain my own system this long time, and now at last I have the right. And then he kind of like blathers on about, you know, all the stuff that but he's, you know, he's kind of, to me, it's typical Twain, making fun of himself and speeches and all that kind of stuff. But there's the other thing about, even though we have a transcript of the toasts, what we don't know, and this is my thing in the biography, is everybody was sitting at this table and they didn't know each other. So the tables, it's like going to a wedding, right? And you're put at a table and you don't know who you're going to sit with. And you end up sitting with some people and then you have a conversation. And what I want to know is what were the people in those tables talking about? But that too,
It may have been a whole generation or a decade before all that, you know, mixing came together. And
Exactly. Yeah. That's why it's like my thing is that something happened at that event. People got to know each other. So I only know about Chestnut. I wrote a biography on Chestnut. So after this party, he went to see his publisher, this guy named Walter Hines Page, who was a former editor of the Atlantic Monthly, was a editor at Houghton Mifflin, and now was at Doubleday, Page and Company in New York. And Page didn't go to the party, but Chestnut went to see his editor in New York after the party and told him all about it. And then he went home to Cleveland and told his whole family, he had 4 children, he told all of them about it. He put the bust that he had of Mark Twain in his library. But about 10 years later, his grandson was looking at it and took it down, and it shattered to pieces, obviously. But he said, you know, he didn't, of course, blame his grandson. He said that was fine. He didn't need it anymore. But for him, this was an important event because because he was invited. It meant that he'd arrived. And he came a long way from Fayetteville, North Carolina, born free black. In 1858, before the Civil War, he worked as a school teacher at a colored school and really worked his way up to become a writer, a recognized writer, a published author. And there was something about this event that showed him, that proved to him, you might say, that he'd arrived. And that was a very important thing for him. I don't know what it was for Willa Cather, for all the other 161 guests gathered there, but it meant something to be at that party and to be included among that aristocracy of brains. And I'd like people to just kind of know about the event, that literature was this, not just like a, I don't know, I feel like it's sort of untouchable. And I'd like to make literature kind of fun and like a big party again. So that's why I'm so glad you've all come to hear this, for whatever it's worth, and to share in some libation and cucumber toast and mushroom toast, and just talk to each other and see what comes out of this conversation. That was really my hope in coming here to Quarry Farm, and I thank all of you for being here tonight. Thank you.